and translating our dreams. Whereas contemplative would be more like meditation, yoga practices, and engaging in dialect, moral dialect that touches into these zones as well. So that's deep, accurate insight and understanding of oneself. Central existential issues of life, in essence, it's this understanding that all of humanity faces certain issues about identity, relationships, meaning and purpose, and endless choices. Years ago, when information and knowledge ruled, there wasn't endless choices. Now, as we have more and more communication, we're becoming more and more overchoiced. And that's a dilemma. And wisdom, that comes after this elaboration gets to this refinement, to this discernment. And I think that's really, really important when we're, looking all around us for where to engage our energies and our attention. Finally, skillful, benevolent responsiveness. Okay, we've talked a fair bit about responsiveness, very different than stimulus and reaction. We're touching into that sacred space, that stillness, that silence, that solitude that is enduring. We might say that wisdom. And from there, skillfulness suggests that wisdom has a practicality. Okay? It relies on self-knowledge, relies on self-development. Benevolence means that it's not just about me, it's not just about we, but there's this understanding of these mini circles of care and compassion and concern. We might take the practice or consider the practice of indigenous nations, of considering, in any decision, what will the impact be in 7 generations from now? Responsiveness, again, unlike reactions, recognizes that, it's not just about us, but it's also about these expanding circles of care, concern, and compassion. Okay, so a couple notes on wisdom to open this conversation that will eventually, morph into more about types and how we orient in the world. What I'd love to do now is to engage in a bit of a round table where each of us will offer reflections on any of the content that came forth between now and when we met last. Okay, so this can be reading your wisdom profile. It can be, just speaking from an open heart of what your wisdom profile meant. Maybe you engaged in the quick trip to hell and back. What came out of that? Any sort of reflections in a few minutes, and feel free to, offer any sort of personal reflections that might be beneficial as well. Manuel, can we begin with you?
Sure. I'll share kind of a short version of a version of my wisdom profile, and this is something that I don't often share publicly. It's something that I just kind of use for myself. I preface it. I like to just kind of go through it mentally, before I meditate or before I fall asleep or when I wake up in the morning. It's kind of become this little routine that I do. So my wisdom profile is as follows. I am the peaceful warrior. I live with an attitude of gratitude, joy, and courage. I create deep and meaningful relationships, and I have perfect health, vitality, and fitness. My work in the world is to facilitate consciousness development towards greater authenticity, integrity, mutuality, and sustainability through my inner and outer leadership, my inspirational teaching, my developmental coaching and consulting, and facilitating small groups. I apply an integral developmental framework to create a life of practice grounded in the reality of goodness, truth, and beauty. And I trust in my intuition and the creative impulse towards greater consciousness, complexity, cooperation, and interconnectedness. I create generative containers that facilitate growth and development, healing, and integration. And I stand for physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and relational health, well-being, and peak performance by encouraging meditation, mindfulness, and transcendence. Dharmic activity, which is that brings fulfillment to the worldly and the spiritual elements of life, and integration and reflection. And then I've been kind of playing with this last little piece, which has become more and more meaningful. I kind of shared that last time too, which is I recognize the reality of climate change and live in accordance with this reality, meaning I minimize my input, I'm politically active, I make choices that reflect my awareness around climate change, and I try to educate people around that. Yeah, that's my wisdom profile. And it kind of changes as I go. Sometimes I add things and I drop some things, but it's a good kind of anchor for me to just come back to. Usually I like to touch into it before I meditate. Yeah.
There's a lot there, Emmanuel. And, just from our relationship, I know that's morphed and that's shifted and that's evolved over the months and years.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. Yeah. I mean, I think the general essence is still the same, but kind of how it shows up is just slightly changing all the time. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing with us this, profile of your wisdom.
Yeah.
Thanks. Cheryl, Tim, perhaps one of you could go next.
Dueling unmuted microphone. Well, that was a hard act to follow, man. Fair.
That's not how it's meant. It's more meant as an inspiration, I guess, for other people.
That's fun. Mine is like a super short, right? Super short because I'm trying to build on this. I went through the exercise and, I was trying to look for themes that sort of fit with me. I really wasn't finding not a lot of qualities. I was really kind of just sort of narrowing it down to a few because I thought, what are the ones maybe that are maybe true for me that I can follow through with, that kind of thing. I think for me, things that are important are just sort of the curiosity and openness, creativity. Those were always coming back for me. One of the things that I try to think of in the morning when I wake up, and sort of I guess it would be, my wisdom contract with myself is that because I'm kind of drowsy, I mean, it's a short phrase, but it's just I'm open to new experiences. And the reason I have found this to be really important to me is one of the things in my reflective practice of learning more, just trying to be wise by knowing myself, is that I have found that I'm pretty quick to grab onto fears. I'm pretty quick to grab onto past experiences. And if I don't let go of them, I'm kind of just in basically a grumpy mood all the time because I'm just kind of building on what's going to happen next is that it's going to have something to do with the past, or that it's, I'm going to react to it some way that I did in the past. So when I wake up and I'm trying to rouse from the sleep world, I just try to think I'm open to new experiences, meaning that I want to look at things with fresh eyes. I don't want to keep attached to whatever I thought yesterday, even if it was good. I just want to have a fresh eye. I want to have an open mind. I like that creativity. And when I meet others, that's what I'm wanting in that space as well. Is I'm wanting it to be fresh. I'm wanting, I'm also not very, I don't want to bring judgment with me. You know, I want to just have whatever's happening is fresh. And I feel the same way in my work world. Definitely. I don't want to attach, I mean, you know, MUM's a university, and honestly, if they were going to shut down all the universities in the United States tomorrow, I'd go, wahoo, let's start something new. Let's start fresh. And that's how I want to go. You know, I feel the same with my family members. It's like, let's start this day fresh. And let me not judge how I react with you from yesterday and the days before. I haven't quite figured out exactly how to put that in the wisdom profile, but keeping it short for me, I think just wanting to be open to new experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. The quick trip to hell was kind of like, part of it is being brave enough to actually do that, right? So my quick trip to hell is, oh, you know, I didn't try something new, or I was afraid. I didn't reach out to do that thing, or maybe call that person and start a new, you know, I don't know. So that was kind of my quick trip to hell, is that I didn't try something new.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that, Cheryl. The freshness and the enlivening elements, and touching in for that quick trip to hell as well. Yeah. Anything else, Cheryl, before we move on to Tim?
No, I think I was in and out of dozing when I was listening to the YouTube videos. I was like, I would listen and I'd fall asleep. I don't even, you know, I think it was one is it Martin Silberg, or
Seligman, yeah.
Seligman. You know, I'm familiar with his work, and I just, you know, to me, it's good stuff. It's just, you know, again, it's, you know, to remain positive or to seek new experiences. I feel like you do have to, you know, for me, my work or my exercise, my practice is to try not to attach that to a past experience. And you know, it's hard. We're wired this way. For survival purposes or whatever. I think our brains are wired this way. So for me, it's a real practice to go, am I reacting to my past? And if it's a yes, it's like, okay, stop it, or give this other thing a chance. Or, well, what if you didn't attach to the past? Well, what would you think about it? How would you think about it now if you're not taking in all your experiences? I mean, I guess, you know, thinking and reflecting on your opening about wisdom, you know, I think that wisdom, and as you grow older and as you become wise, it is trying to discern those things that aren't good for you, right? And one of the things, I mean, for me, that's not good for me is those thought patterns of attaching things to the past, or, you know, not giving it more of a chance to grow or percolate or have different legs to stand on with its own kind of ideas and presence. So, you know, part of that is, again, that being present in the moment it's definitely a practice.
Yeah.
Not easy.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Cheryl. Tim, comments on the wisdom profile and quick trip to hell particularly, and love to hear any insights from that.
I really enjoyed the quick trip to hell. I'd done something similar to that I think at least in the artist's way. You guys have heard of that? It's like a home creativity course, but really it's a lot of it is about just getting in touch with your own sort of values and desires. sources of energy and motivation. And so that idea of like, writing about your idealized funeral, that was the premise of the other activity. And so the quick trip to hell was very familiar in that way. And the wisdom profile, the questions on both of them, I just really liked. I found it really positive. I don't understand why it's called wisdom profile. That's a question you guys can answer now or later or never. But I just remember thinking like, I'm confused about that word choice. I'm curious about it. And I found that, as a journaling practice, it was super rich. So I really like the idea of repeating it every day. Some of the things at the end of your wisdom profile handout, it said, as a practice, repeat this every day as an inner truth of who I am being and becoming. And I thought that was very cool. I have just yesterday, I finally put up whiteboards. We have this room of whiteboards that Natalie and I sort of generated where one of them's 8 feet wide, 4 feet high, nice, right in the middle, so that you could like go way beyond one piece of paper. You know what I'm saying? And I was thinking I've got these 2 that are right next to my desk, and that maybe every day I'll just like write it fresh at the top and say it out loud or something, because it would be the way it's come out so far. It seems like it's probably going to change, and what I've articulated is in part the things that are, I think they're in line with my long-term self, but they're more focused on things that maybe I'm ready to develop now. So it's particularly that second part where it said, what was the question? In 50 years, people will remember me for. That was the short version. That was the one that was like, oh, this I could do every day. In 50 years, people will remember me for my vitality, my clarity of expression, and my understanding. And those 3 things really hit as like, these are things I'm working on now that I value, that are ongoing temperamental gifts that I think I can usefully concentrate on and specialize in to help, to contribute. And then the longer version, I didn't unpack beyond a list of qualities. So I am and I stand for simplicity, deep understanding of self, other, and world, vitality, playfulness, respect, listening, honesty, nature, and love. I really liked one of those questions was, I guess at the end of the quick trip to hell thing, they said one of the things was, it showed a block of sculpture and said, what is getting in the way? And everything that I wrote down, I realized was all part of the theme. It was just lack of structure. It was like structure at home, structure in my work, structure in my social life, and structure in sort of healthy life routines. It's all about structure or lack of. I know how to like help other people generate structure, and I have not made the choices or the commitments in myself. So that was really straightforward. And I thought, okay, right, this is what I've been like. This is definitely a theme, but it's kind of fun to just see it written down in front of me in paper. Yeah, there's certainly more things. Just because answering every single one of those questions, this is still the trip to hell part. Every single one of those questions had lovely, is very much a grounding experience to go through and read those. It's kind of like, oh yeah, you know what you need to do. You know it's important. So that was nice. I appreciated that.
Thanks, Tim, for pointing into those wisdom virtues that are held within, and that exercise, the wisdom exercise, was developed by Vernice Solimer, who wrote that article that we looked at with the quadrants, and we're gonna touch into that in a few moments here as well. And I met Vernice in 2014, and she and I were participants together in a Pacific Integral program with Terry O'Fallon and colleagues. And Vernice described this exercise to me in a way that she anchored herself in her wisdom profile, accessed her wisdom when she was going into places where she was intimidated. And she's a very, very powerful woman who ran the John F. Kennedy University Integral Psychology Master's Program. But to her, that is just, this is who I am and this is what I stand for. And regardless of who I'm speaking for, this is what I bring forward. This is my presence, to embrace the terminology that Cheryl brought forth so frequently. And I think there is a wisdom in that. And when I listen to the descriptions of clarity and vitality and presence and love, I'm reminded, of what I read a few minutes ago of Roger Walsh synthesizing wisdom traditions across the world. I'm going to just very, very briefly go on my computer here and pull up the findings of a fellow named John Izzo. And John Izzo wrote a book called The 5 Secrets You Must Discover Before You Die. It was an interesting study. And he would go to people, if I remember correctly, some of the details might be off a little bit, but he would go to a person and ask, he would go to a wise person, somebody who is perceived to be wise, and then ask that person to recommend other wise people. And so he did this like snowballing type study. And he interviewed hundreds of people who were perceived to be wise about what they understood to be the secrets of life, or, the wisdom virtues, not the resume virtues that, we build our resumes up, but who we are on the interior and what we stand for. And 5 themes arose. Number 1, be true to yourself. So this, as we develop, we move from this false self into this quest for this authentic self and this true self. And then Mark Gaffney ultimately calls us a unique self, so that we're who we are in the world in a way that nobody else can be. And I think that's living our wisdom profile. So that's number 1, be true to yourself. Number 2, this is the quick trip to hell. It's leave no regrets. Smile from Cheryl there. Number 3, I heard this as well, becoming love. Number 4, Cheryl's all over this, living the moment. So a deep presence in that regard. And then finally, this touches into the legacy, but it's, I think a more generous way of it, giving more than you take. And so, I'm brought back to the Wilbur video in which he's talking about the 2 different dominant typologies of the masculine and feminine. And both start out as egocentric and then move into ethnocentric. These are very, very dangerous territories where there isn't giving more than you take. And as we continue to develop into these sociocentric and world-centric, our trajectories become very, very different. And I think by that sort of regard, we become more and more into this terrain of living through wisdom virtues. Very briefly, I want to touch into my wisdom profile. I also want to point out that this is very much an aspiration for me. And it's not that I live this way every day, but it is aspirational. As a wisdom worker, my work in the world involves leading edge learning in small campuses and small towns. In doing so, I facilitate people to uncover and unfold our uniquely connected places in an evolving world. By embedding transpersonal psychology, transpersonal psychology, perennial philosophy, transformative education and leadership into the telos of self, community, and life work. I stand aspirationally for wisdom and equanimity and magnanimity, and I'm deeply and highly committed to optimizing, leading and learning, loving and giving, and living in practical idealism. Soiled in the qualities of generativity and the principles of natural understandings, I live within a patient, reflective humility, a persistent, peaceful directionality, and a prudent, discerning diligence, serve within the strengths of intellection, ideation, and individuation. In the personal realm, we might call this the Buddha nature, the upper left. I inspire development or unfolding potential in service of deepest, highest, most generative self. In the interpersonal realm, this is the second person we space. I ignite generative cultures. And in the practical realm, how we actually show up and what we do in the exterior, the right-hand side, I integrate education, or drawing out, communication, making common, and community or holding common in a more generative systems of leadership. So that's who I hold in an optimal capacity. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, my aspiration for the next few years here is to really touch more and more into what this means to be a wisdom worker. Very different than a creative worker, than a knowledge worker, than a manual worker. I don't know what it means, but that's touching into my wisdom profile, anyways. I want to just kind of open it up here for any comments or reflections from anybody about any insights that maybe arose through our openings there.
It strikes me that part of what's significant to me about something like this on an ongoing basis is that it be inspiring. It inspires like energy and action and direction, and like that idea of validity claims. Like, by what will I know that I'm on the mark with this kind of a tool? And that's what occurs to me, is that being inspirational, being inspiring is a big part of it. I like how you said aspirational. But yeah, I appreciated that.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Tim. So again, mantra refers to tools of the mind, right? And so when we talk of Odyssey toolkits, these are reflective practices that we hold. And we all have tons of them from different places that we've, engaged in. And so we're just tinkering with some of those. Any comments from you, Emmanuel?
I just, when I heard like Cheryl and Tim share kind of the elements of their wisdom profile, it reminded me of kind of when I started playing around with the wisdom profile. It was just like, a few little phrases and words that I resonated with in the beginning. And then I just kind of, started molding it into a few sentences, and then it just kind of changed and grew from there. So that was just kind of a reminder for me how that work started for me. And that was like 2 years ago when we did Hawaii the first time. That's when I started working with the wisdom profile, and it's been really good. And I've just been kind of adapting it to my needs and how my thinking changes on certain topics, I think. Yeah.
Great. Any comments, Cheryl? If not, that's great.
No, I liked what Emmanuel said about it. Yeah, I mean, for myself, I think definitely starting with the smaller phrase and using it in a way that whether it's helping to ground or whether it's just kind of helping to focus or remember what's important. I mean, I think it's easy to get lost for myself anyway along the way, whether it's the day or the years or whatever. And so just having the intentionality of using it and helping to sort of bring you back to your true self, recognizing what those qualities are, and then using it on a daily basis. Like taking a deep breath before you're having a meeting or a social interaction. For me, that's always very helpful. But to also just kind of remember, I don't know, to me, sometimes even just remembering to be kind is one that, maybe I think was taught to me along the way from my parents or my mother. Was always, and there were some sayings that came with the generation And I know they've been challenged, like if you don't have something good to say, don't say anything at all. And I can remember that it's going to be stifling, because then it's like, whoa, how am I going to communicate this difficult thing? But it does give you, one thing that's helpful about it, it gives you, if it's been ingrained in you, it gives you time to pause, or just to be kind. Like, am I being kind right now? If I'm not, take a moment, that play goes on in my head. Anyway.
Yeah. And I'm reminded too of so much of what's been ingrained in us, we've inherited, and perhaps that inheritance is no longer holds tremendous value in our presence. So for example, some traditions are better off being left behind. And I'm going to offer, a specific example that Terry O'Fallon, an integral developmentalist, talks about. And she's growing up as a kid, and she says, "Grandma, how come you always cut the ends off of the ham and putting it in the roaster for Christmas?" And she said, "Well, because my mom did that." And then so she goes and asks somebody else. And it turns out that the origins were that there used to be a smaller pan that you had to cut the ends off to fit in. But this is relevant because the places that we're living in right now are no longer, as a whole, coming from this place of scarcity and deficiency. There is, when we look at flourishing and affluence, this flowing of abundance. That's not to say the whole world is like that, but as a whole. And I think that's a really important recognition when we look at the spiral of human development. Traditions often need to grow up, just as it's beneficial for us to grow up, as Ken Wilber was talking about in that video. Emmanuel and I were talking about the 4-3-2-1 exercise that I brought forward last week, and we made a little modification, and I want to just mention what that is. So my version looks a little like this. We've talked briefly about it, but 5. So from 4-3-2-1, 4 was 4 intelligences, 3 different levels, 2 different choices. Okay, in essence, the defaulting into security or designing into growth, all towards oneness. So the 5-4-3-2-1 might look like this: 5 different intelligences. So these intelligences are the spiritual intelligences, emotional intelligences, what we might say are more social or cultural or relational intelligences, and also mental intelligences and physical intelligences. So I appreciated Emmanuel's addition of the cultural, social, relational orientation to that. 4 considerations. So these are the 4 quadrants. To ensure that we're including all 4 quadrants, we're covering our bases for everything that we're doing. Because if we're not, we're missing out an element. And that's often a critical element. Now, an example from my world in education is when we look at conventional education, it focuses on the right-hand side, on the exterior. Whereas alternative education focuses on the inside, on the left-hand side, the interior. And both blind out the other side. So it's done at the expense of the other side. Whereas an all-quadrant approach views tremendous value in each of the quadrants. So in an integral education sense, in the upper left quadrants, it's making sure that students have a deep commitment to education. On the lower left, it's ensuring that there's broad support from staff, from faculty, from mentors, from the outlying communities. And the upper right, it's ensuring that there's a clear challenge. And so I really appreciated Kim kind of pointing us in the importance of that clarity. And in the lower right, that there is possibility for systemic impact. So again, deep commitment, broad support, systemic impact, and clear challenge. Now, the reason I'm offering an example in an educational context is that learning and reflective practices and how we engage in life has a lot to do with, educate what we tend to think of as education, what we're drawing out within ourselves. So, wow, I really went on with that. The next one is three ways of knowing. And so this is the way of information, the way of knowledge, and the way of wisdom. 2 types. Dominant types are masculine and feminine. In short, the masculine is about judgment, hierarchy, rights, and tends to be more agentic and has this ascending trajectory towards wisdom. Whereas the feminine is more descending towards compassion. It's relationally based. It's more oriented around care and communion and responsibility. Okay, again, these are different sides of the same dimensions, all of which are really critical. One example to really illustrate these 2 types. Did I talk about the horse example before?
Nope.
So there's a baby horse, and the baby horse is absolutely dying. And the mother horses are all gathering around this baby horse, and they're trying to over nurture and over care, and they're doing everything that they can to nurture this horse, this dying horse, back to health. They're lost in otherness, however, and the male horse comes by and very, very discerning, in a very discerning manner, immediately kills the baby horse. And so that's that decisiveness of the masculine energy. And really, well, it's very, very decisive in that regard. So, there's value for both of those. So that's the 2. And all of these are oriented, the one is toward one wisdom. And this is the wisdom that's the unity beneath diversities that we spoke about in the first course. So 5 intelligences, 4 considerations, 3 ways of knowing, 2 types, 1 wisdom. Just something we've given a little attention to.
Can you say a little bit more about the part?
Which part was that, Tim?
The one wisdom.
Yeah. Well, the one wisdom is, if we look at perennial philosophy is what's common across the world. There's agreement wherever we go, essentially across cultures, that there is beauty, goodness, and truth in this, that there is a wisdom in that. And if we look at, what we spoke about wisdom before, of deep, accurate insight into oneself, the central existential issues of life, and responding in a skillful, benevolent way, I think that we're really pointing to this one wisdom. So there's all these different expressions, diversities of wisdom. I'm expressing a version as with my wisdom profile. So are you, Tim. So are you, Cheryl, and so is Emmanuel. But it's all coming from, if we look at it, there's a commonality even between all 4 of ours. And I think that's points to the one wisdom, Tim.
Gotcha. Thanks.
All right. Any other comments, conversations about the videos?
I was just gonna say, I really resonated with in the wearable video of kind of the 3rd level, or the integral expression of masculinity and the integral expression of femininity, which is universal rights versus universal care, and how we want to make sure that we move towards higher stages in the type, higher expressions in the types too. I thought that was really, really a good point and really interesting.
Yeah, and and types, like the dominant expression is masculine, feminine, but other expressions are like personality types, or we were looking at explanatory styles, or growth mindsets are similar to optimistic explanatory styles, and fixed mindsets are pretty identical to pessimistic explanatory styles, or how we make decisions. Different types all kind of arise from this movement toward communion and care, or this movement towards rights and a more agentic capacity. Emmanuel, would you pull up that the slide from with the quadrants? Emmanuel is going to pull up the slide that we looked at several weeks ago in Bernice's article. And remember, there's all the leadership questions in each of the different quadrants. And let's start on the lower side here, Emmanuel. And when the quadrant comes up, encourage us all to just consider how these different types show up in each of the quadrants. Okay? So we're just going to look at a couple of questions. We'll start with the lower right leadership inquiry. Do I understand the systems in which I live? Okay, so consider a system in your world. Now put in a context of masculine and feminine typologies. Where does the system fit in there? A lot of systems tend to be designed in more masculine qualities, and as you know, as we become more wise in our cultures, we bring in many of the feminine qualities, because we integrate what's missing, and we move more and more to that. Do I understand the systems in which I work, which I wish to change? How do those fit in from a masculine, feminine perspective?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's been something interesting. I feel like most of the kind of economic systems that we have are like very heavily masculine dominated. And so kind of starting to balance that out in different businesses is I think a really interesting kind of endeavor. And you know, I mean, MEM is a spiritual university, but it still feels very like masculine dominated in the way that the systems are set up and how it's functioning. And I don't think I can come up with any system that's like an economic system that's like feminine dominated.
So like one example that comes up for me from partially an economic system, but more of a system, a community system, is Lakea. And so, Tim, this is an intentional community where Emmanuel, Cheryl, and I have all been a part of. And it operates from a very, very feminine typology.
Yeah.
You know, just as a contrast.
Yeah, definitely.
Tim, Cheryl, is there anything? Tim?
I wonder how local would relate to this typology, because they're based on relations. They tend to be a little bit more personal. I mean, they're based on relationships. They tend to be more personal. They
What is that? Can you say the
local currencies?
Oh, local currencies.
So small scale local currencies, not something quite as big as like, there's some huge ones, or some pretty big ones, like Ithaca has a big one. But in a lot of sort of, you know, sub 100,000, even sub 50,000 person towns, there are small ones, and they are really based on like helping people understand what they have that's valuable. So that actually sometimes it pulls people entirely out of the economy. They're not trying to value, they're not trying to peg their dollars to the US dollar and how goods and services are already valued according to US dollars. they sometimes are more values driven, and they're definitely more relational, if I understand it. Janet worked with one in a town where we used to live together, and the primary goal was to get people together to talk about what their needs were and what their abilities were, and to help them understand that the needs were meetable and the abilities were valuable. So a little bit, I don't know how far that speaks to a feminine versus masculine kind of typology, but it occurs to me that might be significantly different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree that probably like local currencies are probably like, have more feminine qualities and maybe balance that out a little bit, but not always necessarily. I think it depends on how they're designed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a good example.
Okay, let's briefly move over to the lower left leadership inquiry. And I'm eyeing a couple like, how do I respond to disagreements? How do I listen to others? And particularly, as I'm reflecting on this, perhaps I listen from a more masculine perspective in some situations, and I think also from a more feminine element in others. But maybe this is helpful in communicating too. Yeah, same as disagreements. How do I appreciate the contributions of others? Let's briefly go to the upper left. Maybe ask Tim or Cheryl if you could maybe pull one out of the upper left to chat about for a moment.
I think an interesting one is, how do I access and experience my wisdom, integrity, emotions, and courage in the face of adversity? If you're talking about a male and female aspects or points of view, I don't know, I see that as a opportunity for a lot of possible differences, even if it's, within the same person. I might approach that with one group of skills, abilities, and, depending on the adversity.
Yeah, absolutely. As we move over to the upper right, Tim, are there any there that kind of catch your attention?
I'm going to shift the photo or the videos over. As I was reading that, I was feeling a little discouraged.
Say that again.
As I was reading the left hand, the upper left, I was feeling a bit discouraged, I have to admit.
How so?
Because of, I guess, my reaction to many of them were sort of negative thoughts or unpleasant judgments.
Like self-doubt kind of a thing? Or?
A little bit more negative than that, but yeah. So anyway, I'm shifting gears.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was less self-doubt and more just low self-appraisal. But as far as, the easiest thing, upper right, is, am I taking care of my physical health? That's the easiest thing for me to relate to. And it's like, yeah, better than most people. Like, that's one that I can say. Many of the rest of them feel like they feel tiring. They're like, oh God, it's a big, complicated question, and it feels heavy. It doesn't feel easy. It doesn't feel something. I think maybe my standards tend to be, or my view tends to be much bigger than my capability. And so my capacity or my capability looks kind of meek or poor.
Okay. Well, thanks, Tim and Cheryl, for your comments. We're just about at the top of the hour now, and we're also essentially wrapping up the facilitated portion of this course here. Next week, we're going to move over to having you present a short paper that we're going to encourage you to prepare. And paper is a formal word. In essence, I'll be sending out a document in a few moments that recaps where we've been in the last 6 or 7 weeks. And specifically, the encouragement is to jot down a few thoughts in the form of a paper, maybe 750 to 1,500 words. That's just a broad range. It can be, you're never going to show this paper to anyone else, but what we're going to focus our attention to next week is to have you present your findings from the last few weeks. And there's 5 specific areas that we'll be touching into. And again, I'll be sending this out in a few moments. But briefly, the instructions are to start with your wisdom profile and then address the following 5 points. To me, being a reflective practitioner means, okay, so what's it mean to be a reflective practitioner? Second of all, how might integral approaches be included in your worker service as a reflective practitioner? Third, how, if at all, has this course contributed to your personally meaningful project, your initiative that you pointed to at the beginning of the course? And fourth, what is next for you in relation to this project? Whether it's family or engagements with work in a certain way. And then lastly, include any closing comments about anything you might have learned about yourself through this course. And so again, you're not asked to hand anything in that way, but rather you'll have an opportunity 10, 15, 20 minutes to present what you've learned, any insights that have come through. And how you prepare this is completely up to you. It can be in journal form, it can be notes jotted down. If you want to write a formal essay, go for it. That's completely up to you. So that'll be our focus next week. Sound okay?
Yeah.
And I'll be sending this note out to everyone again, and I anticipate, and we're grateful for your participation all the way through here, and hope you'll join us again next week
For the final party.
Thanks for your work, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys for showing up. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, appreciate it. And let's say farewell for now, and we'll meet again in 1 week at this time.
Great.
Bye, Cheryl. Bye.